So, on to Sammy's other appearance. Well, Sammy didn't appear, but he wrote in. So, Eddie Trunk on Trunk Nation, on Sirius XM, okay? On his Sirius XM show, Trunk Nation, he did his top 4 Sammy Hagar era Van Halen albums. And his official top 4 was 5150, number 1, number 2, Fuck, number 3, 0812, number 4, Balance. But he opened up this to all his listeners, and they all called in with all their different lists. It's all great. But
weren't there only 4 Van Halen studio albums?
No, it's 4 albums with Sam. Yeah. Top 4.
Well, how is Eddie doing his top 4?
Because
he's 4 albums with Sam?
All right, let me explain. What he did was he ranked the Van Hagar album.
Okay.
Yeah, he did a ranking. So now the interesting part about this whole thing is not so much Eddie's whole thing, but Sammy wrote in and ranked his own favorites and made comments on each one. So number 4, the bottom of the barrel for Sam, was Balance. He says, and this is directly from Sam's words, not because it was a bad record, it just has a darkness about it. It was painful to make. I feel it and hear it every time I hear a song from that album. It was completely overproduced, in my opinion. Eddie was changing his guitar sound drastically, and producer Bruce Fairburn kept us separated to finish the record. So he wrote this in to Eddie Trunk. That's number 4. Number 3 to him was OU812. And he said, we took nothing seriously at this time with the band. We thought we could do no wrong. Everything seemed to work and was accepted. We were having so much fun together, enjoying the success of 5150 album and tour, that we were basically goofing off in the studio and ended up making a pretty damn good record. When It's Love and Finish What You Started have stood the test of time, considering how quickly we put this one together. Interesting insight. Number 2, for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. I think it was quite the giant step for us. We took a long time recording that record, honing in on the writing, and Right Now was a big step for Van Halen. And number 1, 5150. It was the first, and also came so natural. I think we did it in a month. Very raw, very real. What do you make of Sammy's comments, Dave?
Interesting. I think he's a little biased and a little jaded too much by putting Balance at the bottom.
Yeah.
Because of all the bad vibes going on there. It's tough when you're in the eye of the hurricane.
Oh, totally. Yeah, he's got personal attachments.
No, he does. Well, to all of them. I think it's tough to judge your own music when it's so intertwined with the making of the album.
Right.
And it affects your outlook. So I wouldn't have quite stacked them the same way he did.
How would you stack them?
I would put OU812 number 4.
Right.
I would put Balance number 3.
Right.
And number 1 and number 2, man, they're really tough because I always flip-flop on that. But today, I will say number 2 is for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge and number 1 is 5150.
Interesting. Okay, well, I would say the same exact order, except today I would put for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge first and 5150 second. That's where I stand. Now, Sammy Hagar apparently is also working on another project. Guitarist Lenny Cordola is doing a special musical project with kids in Afghanistan called the Miraculous Love Kids. He appeared on the Eddie Trunk Show, and he said that Sammy Hagar will collaborate on a cover of the Steve Miller Band song Fly Like an Eagle with the Miraculous Love Kids, and that should be coming up next year, so we can look out for that. Also coming up, Alex Van Halen. My God, we never have a news item on Alex, so this is a rarity. Modern Drummer is coming out with their Special Legends Edition, Volume 2, which will be featured on Alex Van Halen. The piece will include Alex Van Halen's 1983, 1993, 2008 Modern Drummer cover stories, plus transcriptions of classic Van Halen tracks, a survey of the beats and fills, evolutions of his famous live drum kits, a deep dive into his unique snare sound, as well as an exclusive brand new 2020 interview. You guys want this special collector edition? You can buy it at moderndrummer.com. What do you think of that, Dave?
Interesting. We really don't hear too much from Alex at all.
No, so he's the mystery man.
That would be cool. I'm sure there's lots of cool stuff to read and see in there. And a 2020 interview.
I know. What's that going to have?
I would be curious to read that for sure.
For sure. Now, Sirius XM did a pop-up tribute channel to Van Halen when Eddie passed. The channel temporarily took over Sirius XM Deep Tracks on Channel 27. The programming featured Van Halen music as well as remembrances and live cuts. However, it has since ceased. But Van Halen fans are circulating a petition to push Sirius XM to make it permanent. However, like Eddie Trunk noted in his program, Trunk Nation, if this were to be the case, the Van Halen camp would really have to get involved by providing some extra content, B-sides, rarities, live tracks, interviews, because there's only, 131 Van Halen songs, and they need more material to make this happen.
132.
Excuse me, 132 Van Halen songs. And Michael Anthony, Dave, was rated number 1 on the 25 underrated band members who deserve more love. Wow, if there is any list that is made for Michael Anthony, isn't this the list? Yardbarker put out this list of the top 25 underrated band members who deserve more love. Michael Anthony was number 1. Number 2, Roy Bittan from the E Street Band. Number 3, Geezer Butler from Black Sabbath. Number 4, Mike Campbell from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Number 5, John Deacon of Queen. And the list went on and on. But my God, if there is one guy who should top that list, it is Michael Anthony. What did you make of that, Dave?
Let me tell you, that list was phenomenal. Not only was Mike the first guy listed, but there were a lot of unappreciated people on that list where I was like, that list is spot on.
Yep.
Well worth reading of, and quite a few bass players, of course, as you might imagine. But a lot of people who don't get the credit that they should for being parts of band and contributing what they did to a band.
Absolutely. Now, the Detroit Free Press did a story on Valerie Bertinelli's brother David, who is Eddie Van Halen's former brother-in-law. Now, David Bertinelli, as we all have mentioned prior on this, is a photographer part-time, and he went on tour with Van Halen. He used to take all kinds of photos of Ed and Val through the years, and he has been close to Eddie all through the decades, even after Valerie and Eddie parted ways as a couple. But he knew Eddie was ill, of course, but he didn't expect his death. And he said, it knocked me over. It hit me so hard. Ed was very down to earth. I didn't look at him as a rock star brother-in-law. He was part of our family. Even after he and Val divorced, they went through some ups and downs, but they always remained close and they raised a wonderful son. Now, David Bertinelli, he manages parks and trails for the Charlevoix County, and he's also a photographer in his free time. He took hundreds of photos of Van Halen and Valerie and Ed all through the years on the road in the 80s and the 90s. And David hopes to publish a book and photos with Van Halen, contributing memories to each of the pictures. He's 59 years old at this point, and he is working on that book. We had mentioned that previously in a Van Halen news segment, and he actually looked back at the times in the article about how Valerie got involved with Ed. He said, she borrowed my car one day, and I had an 8-track tape with Van Halen on it, and she thought it was really good. And she said that he's good-looking and plays good music. She had it in her mind, she's got to meet this guy, Eddie Van Halen. So the Bertinellis made it backstage, and Eddie met Dave, and David, who was nearby with his camera, actually took photos of the moment that Valerie and Ed met. He says, I was there from the very first moment they met. They were backstage, and they were completely zoned in on each other. Van Halen was scheduled to perform the next night in Baton Rouge, so Valerie and her brothers drove there so she could spend more time with the rocker. It snowballed from there, and a year later, they were married. The two married in April of 81. They were together until July of 2001. They separated, and they divorced officially in 2007, but remained close right up to the moment of his death. In fact, Valerie was at his bedside when he died. He said he would go on the road very often with the band, capturing every moment he could. He said, it was a difficult thing because I was a fan and I was taking it all in at the same time, but I got some really unique shots after the show. I talked to Ed about the idea of putting a book together briefly, and he said it was okay. My goal was to get him involved and comment on some of the images, but unfortunately that didn't happen. Bertinelli said he has hundreds of photos through the years and that many which have not been seen publicly. I was able to capture things that other people couldn't, such as backstage, on the road, at home, in Van Halen's 5150 studio in California. He is still pursuing the book. He said it's a labor of love and has lots of photos with stories behind them. He also noted when he would go to their house in California, Eddie and Val's house, when they were together, he said they'd crash on the couch. And he said sometimes Ed would come into the living room and be up all night. He said he'd work on a riff over and over, and I'd be trying to sleep, but he'd be working all hours of the night just to get it perfect. He says he remembers hearing the riffs of 5150 and Dreams early on, and he says that he noticed Wolfie had natural talent right from the beginning. He said it makes me sad that Ed won't be able to see him go on the road and prosper. He also noted that Ed was incredibly generous and that he donated his guitars for his son's school, St. Mary's School of Charlevoix, for a fundraiser, and it was one of the last signed guitars he ever donated. And he said the proceeds went to the music and arts program toward tuition assistance. And he said about his brother-in-law, he was a reluctant star, but he had the God-given talent that many people enjoyed. He wanted to make people happy, and that's what he did with his music, his generosity with donating guitars, and always giving his time. He was just a unique individual. So, obviously, good words from David Bertinelli. I would love to have him on this podcast at some point, maybe when he comes out with his book. What do you make of that, Dave?
I'd love to see that book. He must have some great pictures.
It's going to be phenomenal.
I can't help but think, like, you know, him and his brothers were big Van Halen fans, and they pretty much used Val to get backstage.
Yeah, well, I guess you use anything you can, right? Well, Val was a hot TV star, a beautiful woman.
Well, exactly. And they were like, hey, listen, Van Halen's coming to town. Don't you want to meet Ed?
Exactly.
Get backstage?
Yeah, get back there. Unbelievable. So now, Steve Perry of Journey was speaking to Rolling Stone about Eddie Van Halen. He talked to Andy Green, and he said that people think that Eddie is the most amazing guitar player lead-wise, and he is. But no one talks about an incredible rhythm player. He also said that when Van Halen opened up for them in Montrose, he says, I don't think anybody knows about this. He said, when David Lee Roth left Van Halen in 1985, I was living in the Bay Area, not sure what I was going to do anymore. I don't remember how it went down, but either I called Eddie or Eddie called me. Back in those days, we were both having what would you call late-night behaviors on the phone, and all I know is we both ended up on the phone that night having some fun talking trash. Eddie said I should come down sometime and we should jam and play. I wanted so badly to do that, and we talked about how cool it would be musically. This was all before Sammy Hagar. My only problem that I had with it was I don't know if I could be the guy and go out and represent the David Lee Roth years with my voice. I don't know if I want to be that guy. And shortly thereafter, Sammy got the gig, and he was obviously the perfect fit for Van Halen. I don't know what Eddie's intentions were when he called me. He was just saying, let's play together. It wasn't a promise. It was just, why not? Let's see what this sounds like. So, interesting, huh? Can you imagine Steve Perry fronting Van Halen, Dave?
That would be interesting because he's got pipes, man.
Oh,
so,
please, yeah.
You know, I don't think about what ifs too often, as you know, but that one, that could have been interesting.
Unbelievable. Well, think about this, Dave, how interesting this is. Ozzy Osbourne said on his Sirius XM Ozzy Speaks, Eddie asked me if I wanted to sing in the band. He didn't give a specific timeline as to when this was, but he said it was after Sammy Hagar's tenure. He says, I think I was a bit drunk. We've all done one of those calls at 4 in the morning. I've got a great idea call. Then he said, in regards to Eddie Van Halen and honoring Eddie, he says, you think I've seen it all. Then out of the blue comes somebody with such a revolutionary way of playing. To watch Eddie play, his hands would turn into a spider, and he always made it look so easy. So obviously, Van Halen opened up for Black Sabbath on their 1978 tour and blew them off the stage. And the final item of Van Halen news, Steve Vai spoke to Patrick Doyle of Rolling Stone, and he said, believe it or not, recalls, the day after I left the David Lee Roth Band in 1989, I don't know how, but Edward found out, and he called me. That was the start of our nice relationship and friendship. For about 6 months, we hung out together, and I got to know the guy. I remember he said something very interesting. I thought I was going to dislike you. He said something to that effect. When I joined David Lee Roth's band, it was a great opportunity for me to play such well-constructed rock songs. They were just a dream. To be on stage with Dave playing those songs was quite a hoot. And of course, I could never play them like Eddie. I never tried. Only an idiot competes with Edward Van Halen. He says, I haven't seen him in 7 years or so. Last time I saw him was backstage at a Motorhead concert many years ago. He was not looking really good, and he was going through some funk, but his smile was still there. So, a little reflection from Steve Vai, a man who filled the Eddie Van Halen role, I guess, in the David Lee Roth band. But what do you make of that, Dave?
Yeah, I didn't